Welcome to the course Greece and the Rise of Early Christianity. And so I'm going to go over the early period of Greek life in the Mycenean period. In this short video, we'll just primarily focus on the kingdoms of Mycia, as well as taking a quick kind of look at the concept of a polis, a Greek city. And then in other videos, we will talk about other kind of periods of Greek history. And then as we move into the rise of early Christianity, particularly focusing in on Paul and Paul's travels within Greece and kind of what life might have been like for many of the early believers, the Pauline communities who were living in Greek places like Philippi or Thessalonica, or places like in Corinth. And so this course deals both with a brief survey of the history of Greece and as well focusing on particularly the way in which Greek culture may have shaped and impacted the way in which Christians in the first century expressed their faith in Jesus in that context. So we'll begin here then by looking at an overview of a timeline for early Greece. This definitely takes us from the Mycenaean kingdoms to the fall of the Greek aristocracy. So you can start really from 1650 to 1150 BC, or you may see it sometimes BCE. So BCE stands for before Common Era, era. So that is oftentimes used in scholarly discourses because when they're engaging with people from other cultures, BC tends to stand for before Christ. And so in ways of dialoguing with people who really don't see themselves as Christians or want to relate time with the Christian kind of calendar, they have adopted BCE, before Common Era. And the Common Era is the period of time in which both Christianity and Judaism arose. So both of them arose within the first century. And so they'll use that designation, Common Era, to describe the same period of time. It's the same years, but they're just using a different designation. So some other periods of time that we'll be looking at then is the 8th century, sometimes referred to kind of the Greek Dark Ages. And this is really the work of Homer and Hesiod, Olympic Games. Then there's the 7th through the 6th century BC. So this is the rise and the fall of the Greek aristocracy. The 5th to the 4th century, sometimes then really known as kind of the classical Greek period. This is the time of Socrates, Plato, Aristotle. And then we get to the 3rd and 2nd century BC, the Hellenistic period. So really we're going to get here with the roles of Philip of Macedon and his son Alexander the Great, their engagement with the Persians, defeat of the Persians, and then afterwards the Greek Empire as it was then divided after Alexander the Great's death. And then the 2nd century through the 4th century AD is really a Roman period. This is the Caesars and the emperors. And so in this course, we're really not going to spend much time in exploring the Roman history. But of course, early Christianity arises in the Roman period. And the Romans looked at the Greeks and admired the Greeks. And there's a lot of things that continue to be representative from Greek culture in the Roman period. So that's really basically the kind of the timeline of this course. So we'll look here then at the Mycenaean kingdoms. So the name Mycenaean comes from the place of Mycia, which is in the Peloponnese. So if you're thinking about that map of Greece, the kind of lower portion of Greece is the Peloponnese. Around the Aegean Sea, there were fortresses, and these fortresses that have been discovered indicates the existence of large estates. So they had complex class structures and a military. that is maintained by a government and a state religion. So certainly looks like a developed civilization. These fortresses, some that are found on the island of Crete, represents what we might call as kingdoms. And so you'll have a person that will be designated as a ruler, and these subjects to this person, and they have diplomatic relations, particularly with Egypt, Achaia, with the Hittites in Central Asia Minor. So they were trading partners with these other powers that existed in the area. And so the Mycenean kingdoms represent really the kind of the oldest indicators of Greek civilization. Now, this really brings us to the question about what we mean by a Greek city or a polis. And so Aristotle said that man is by nature a political animal. In other words, that human beings need to live in relationship with other people in some type of structure, some type of order. And for people like Aristotle and Plato, the city represents the ideal ordering or structure or the advancement of human beings. Humans can develop or they can flourish if they primarily live in a city or are related to a city. Now, of course, people do live in agricultural places. There are farmers in other places, but for the philosophers, thinking about human development, what it means to live in the capacity of a life, the city became very central. And so, a lot of ways, Greek culture uh, focused on the structure and organization of cities as the representation, as it were, of human existence. But of course, thinking about the Greek polis raises a number of type of questions that continues to, be discussed in the Greek literature and could even still be discussed today. So questions about what makes a polis. In other words, what do you have to have in order to have a substantive city? Do you have to have walls? How many inhabitants do you have to have? How much trade do you have to have? What is the organization of its um, rulers in a city? So, what makes up a polis? What helps to define a polis? Also, who can be a citizen of a polis? So, this is really helps us as well begin to think about the importance of citizenship. So it's not everybody, it's not all inhabitants of a city who are deemed as citizens. Very oftentimes, you first of all were males who are citizens, and they of course are the heads of families. And then, but not just males, because you also have slaves, and slaves are not going to be considered citizens of a city. So, but also a lot depends upon whether or not these males have certain capacities about themselves. Do they have land? Are they landowners? How much wealth do they have? How much influence they have? And so, are they, if they are a beggar, could they be a citizen of a city? Do they have to have fought in a war in order to be a citizen? So there's lots of questions about what makes a citizen. Just and once again, just being born there doesn't make it. So when we think about in the New Testament, when we find Paul interacting with different people who are living in cities like Corinth or like Philippi or Thessalonica, they may be residents of those places, but they're not necessarily citizens. And it's citizens who have the rights, who have the protections, and it's not necessarily the residents who do. So acquiring citizenship is a issue of great deal of honor, and so citizenship can be awarded to people on different bases. For instance, the Apostle Paul's family, were Roman citizens. Now, that doesn't mean they lived in Rome, but they were granted Roman citizenship by some means. We don't know if that happens to do with something that Paul's father did, that he was awarded that, and then it was granted down to his children, or if it's because of some relationship they have with Tarsus, and what that city had become in Asia Minor. So citizenship is an important concept in the Greco and the Roman world, and so questions about who could become a citizen and what one had to demonstrate in order to become a citizen was very important. And of course, the big question is about who should rule over a polis. So, what kind of government best represents? So, in the early days, of course, you're going to have kingdoms and you're going to have rulers, or what sometimes is referred to as a despot. But gradually, what will happen is there will become a change in how cities ought to be governed, where there is shared responsibility or shared government over the people. So these questions about what makes the best type of cities became important in terms of evaluating the characteristic of the governments that are used for them. So in our next video, we'll take a look at the Greek warriors, and we'll also kind of talk a little bit about Greek religion and how that is a background to understanding Greek culture.